Next up, we have a recorded session from Dave PARADI, but he is about in chat, so if you've got any questions, you can drop them in there and he'll answer them. Dave PARADI has been recognized by the media and his clients as a presentation expert. He's authored 10 books on effective PowerPoint presentations, and his ideas have appeared in publications around the world. Dave is one of fewer than 10 people in North America recognized by Microsoft with the MVP award for his contributions to the PowerPoint, Excel, and Teams communities. His articles and videos on virtual presenting have been viewed over 4.8 million times and liked over 17,000 times on YouTube. He's a highly rated conference speaker and has delivered more than 500 customized training sessions around the world in the last 24 years. So let's get started.
Hi, it's Dave PARADI. Welcome to this session where I'm going to share some of my favorite hacks for Excel charts. Each of these hacks is going to allow you to create more advanced charts and to annotate your charts without having to add shapes or text boxes. So let's dive right in and talk about the first hack that I want to show you. That first hack is being able to force a chart to start at 0. Now, why is this an issue? Don't charts always start at 0? Well, actually, column, bar, and line charts won't, depending on the data. And it's best illustrated with this tweet that was sent out a few years ago. And what it shows is that if the data is close to each other, and here they have figured out it's 83.33%. So if the minimum is 83.33% of the maximum, then the chart will not start at 0. Why is this a problem? It's a problem because this distorts people's interpretation of the chart. They can easily misinterpret it. The column heights are supposed to represent the values. But as you can see on the right example here, they don't represent those values accurately. The first column looks like it's 1/3 of the height of the third column, but that's not actually true for the values. So how do we fix this? Well, we're going to fix it by adding a series that is going to be set to 0, so it forces the chart. Now, won't we see that series, Dave? No, we're going to make that series invisible. We're going to hide it. So let's go over to Excel and I'll show you how this is done. So here we are in Excel. The data is quite simple. We have our different areas here and their uptime percentage. And you'll notice, given the values here, if I create a column chart, for example, with just these values, so if I say insert a regular column chart, you'll notice the vertical axis does not start at 0. It starts at 75. And that's what Excel does. And this is why this is a problem. So let's delete that. And let's go and say, how do we create this? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to create an extra data series. I've called it 0 here, and it just has one value, and it's 0. Now, when we create a column chart that has both of these data series, Excel has to look at it and say, well, what are all the values? Oh, there's a 0. That's not within the 83.3%. So I have to start the axis at 0. And that's how we force it to start at 0. But again, the concern might be is how do we make it disappear? Well, part of the value is setting it to 0 because that's not going to show up on a column chart. And we can make it disappear by layering. So let me go ahead and select both of our data series here. And I'm going to say insert a chart, and I'm going to select my simple regular column chart. And you notice here now it started at 0, but it's showing us our two data series, uptime percentage and 0. So how do we make this change? I'm going to move this up here so we can see it. What we're going to do is we're going to set the overlap of these two data series to 100%, which means we put them on top of each other. Now, because that column is 0, there's really no column there, so there's nothing covering up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select any of the data series. I'm going to press Control-1 on my keyboard. This brings up the formatting task pane. And you'll notice here, let me zoom in so you can see this. So you'll notice here that there's the series overlap. And by default, it is minus 27%, which means the columns are beside each other with a little gap. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set that series overlap to 100%. And now what happens is it lays them on top of each other. Well, we're not covering anything up because there's only one column and it's 0 anyways, which is down at the bottom. Now I can set the gap width. I find this to be too large. It makes the columns too skinny. So I'm going to set that to 50%. And now we can see that our chart starts at 0 the way we want it to, and it does not have that overlap. Now, if you're concerned, you can certainly get rid of the fill and the line color for that particular data series, the 0 data series. You can do that by going to the chart format ribbon, and on the left-hand side here, in this drop-down list, you can select the data series called 0. And then once you select that data series, you can then go and set the fill color to be no fill and the outline to be no outline. Now, it doesn't really matter that much because it's not really seen anyways. So now we can just go ahead and remove the legend because we don't need that. We don't need people to know there's another data series there. So what we've done now is we have forced this Excel chart to start at 0. And this works for column charts, bar charts, and line charts. Let's take a look at the next chart hack that I want to show you. Making that extra 0 data series invisible leads us into our next chart hack, which is to use invisible segments to position visible segments in a chart. And this is what I use to create waterfall charts. This is my preferred method for creating waterfall charts. This is an example here, and this is created using a stacked column chart, not the built-in waterfall chart in Excel. I find that that isn't flexible enough and doesn't give me the flexibility I want as a chart creator. So I create them using a stacked column chart. Now these green and gold segments that appear to float up above the axis, those are actually being supported by invisible segments that are there to support and position them, but they're turned to be invisible so that it's invisible, making visible positioned where we want them to be. And so I want to show you how this is done in Excel using a simpler example, using a steps to a total graph. It's kind of like a waterfall graph that starts at 0. So let's go over to Excel and let me show you how we can use these invisible segments to position visible segments. So we're back in Excel, and this is our data. We have our 4 regions and the sales from each of these regions. And what we want to do is we want to show how these sales add up to the total overall sales. And when you bring data in, one of the things I always find helpful for me is to have that data in one part of my worksheet, usually close to the top. And that could be either you copy it in from another worksheet or it's linked to another worksheet, but it brings the data in from your analysis. And then I set up a separate chart data table. Why? Because this allows me to have those extra data series. And you'll see right here my Spacer 1 series. When I'm using invisible segments, data series, I always set them to be spacer because it gives me that clue that, hey, this is just a space. It's not going to be shown. And so what I'm doing is I'm setting up a stacked column chart. Spacer 1 is going to be my first segment. That's going to start down at the bottom if there's a value there. And then the next segment is going to be my sales. So this allows me to position an invisible segment at the bottom that supports a visible segment on top of it. And I actually have 3 data series here. So I have my spacer series, invisible, sales, which is visible, and then I have a total series. Why do I have the total series separate from the sales? Because I want the flexibility to be able to change that formatting, especially the color I want to be able to change. And this allows me to just change the data series instead of changing one point or one column in the column chart. Now, how am I going to create this? Well, first of all, let's take a look at the calculation. So spacer 1 is set to 0 for the first column here because, well, there's nothing before it. If you're using a waterfall chart, again, it's probably going to be 0 because you have a starting value. Then we have our next calculation. And here's where the calculation here is really quite simple. It's just the previous spacer, B15, plus the sales value. So what was the previous spacer, and then add on the visible segment because that creates the invisible portion for the next support. Now, in a waterfall chart, This is going to be a little more complicated because you have to decide whether that previous segment is up or down, and this segment is it up or down. So the formula is a little more complicated, but the idea is the same. We're figuring out how much space does the visible segment need below it in order for it to be positioned properly in the chart. I'm using a simpler example just so we can sort of get the idea here. Now, for our total, we don't have anything in the spacer one or the sales because, again, we want that to stand out. And I've just calculated the total here. Simple, just add the spacer, the last spacer plus the last sales, and that's our total. So now we're going to create this chart. I'm going to select all of the rows and the columns, and I'm going to insert, and I'm going to select my stacked column. And I'm just going to zoom in for a second here. You want to make sure you're selecting this one, the stacked column, not this other one, 100% stacked. That's not going to give you what you want. You want to make sure you select the stacked column. That's the one that we want. And we see in our chart here, we have our orange segments that are the visible segments and the blue, which are invisible. How do we turn them to be invisible? Well, it's really quite simple. We can select that particular segment, and then we can go to the chart format ribbon. And in the chart format ribbon, in shape fill, I can say no fill. And you'll notice that immediately it makes them invisible. Now, when I select the visible segment, the sales segment, I can change it to whatever color I want. So for example, if I want that fill color to be, let's see, this green, and then the total, I want that to be the blue, I can do that. And now I can get rid of the legend because it's not really telling me anything. The labels down on the horizontal axis tell me everything I need. And now I've created a steps to a total chart. So just like a waterfall chart, it allows us to see each of the segments and compare those segments to each other. Clearly, region C is the largest sales segment for this particular time period. And it constitutes, looks to be close to half of the total. And that's how these particular charts are really valuable. And a great way to create them is to use this chart hack, to use invisible segments to position those visible segments. Of course, you can format this any way you want. You can make the columns wider, as I showed you in the previous example. But this is how we use this chart hack. Now, let's talk about the next chart hack that I want to show you. The next chart hack that I want to show you is using the NA error value to hide a data point. Now, initially, you might be thinking, Dave, why would I want an error to show up on my chart? That just doesn't sound like it's a good idea. And it wouldn't be except for the fact that this error, the NA error value, by default does not appear on a chart. Why is this valuable? It's valuable because it allows you to set up data series where some, maybe most of the data points you don't want to show up. You can create that data series and simply use the NA error value in that data point because you know it's not going to show up on the chart. This allows you to set up multiple data series in your chart, each of those data series being used for only one purpose. For example, in waterfall charts, I have a data series for those positive segments, for negative segments, for total segments. Each of those segments I can format separately, and when a value isn't supposed to be shown, I just simply use the NA error value. And conveniently, what you're going to see in the example is that there's a function in Excel that creates that NA error value. We don't have to type it in. It's already built in. So let's go over to Excel and let me show you how we can use this NA error value to our advantage when building charts in Excel. We're back in Excel, and the example here is that we want to show the maximum temperature. We want to highlight that maximum temperature in a series of data for 1 week, Sunday through Saturday, you can see here. How do we make that one maximum stand out? Well, we could manually calculate it, or what we can do is we can use this idea that the NA error value doesn't show up to create a second data series. So we're going to have a column chart, and that second data series, the maximum data series, is going to overlap the regular data series. But it's only going to be shown for one value, the maximum. So when I set up my chart data table here, I have my temperature as it was input, as it came in from our data source. And then I have another data series called max for our maximum. And this uses a formula. I'm going to zoom in on the formula so we can see it. And let's talk about this particular formula. So the formula says, okay, if this particular temperature, so we're in row 18 here. So if B18 equals the maximum, so we ask Excel, go look at all the data, B18 through B24, and find the maximum. If this value, B18, equals that maximum, then do what? Well, in this max data series, put in the value for this data point being that temperature. Because for the maximum temperature, that's what we want. But if it's not the maximum, which of course is going to be all the data points except for the one maximum, then what do we do? And this is where we see this function, the NA error function. What the NA error function does, it doesn't need any arguments. It's just NA, open round bracket, close round bracket. What does it do? What it does is it puts in this NA error value. This allows us to have that data point not show up in the chart. So even though there is a data point, you see a data point here for each of the max data, each of the rows for the max data series, these NA ones don't show up. And the only one that does show up is that 25, the maximum. The other reason that this NA is really valuable to put in as a data point instead of a blank or some other value is because, well, those will show up on the chart. But the other thing is that when you are doing calculations, if you have to calculate something with this particular data point, you can use the if_NA function in Excel. What if_NA does, that function, it says, well, if the value is NA, then you get to specify what the value is. So it doesn't error. The calculation doesn't blow up. It doesn't give you an error. This makes it really valuable when we're doing these calculations, especially, when we've talked about these invisible segments, and visible segments, and you start to have segments that you don't want calculated, or some segments don't have a value for waterfall charts. Again, an NA error value is going to be for some of those data points, but you have to do calculations on them. That's where the if_NA helps. So you see how these functions work together. Now, let's build this chart and show you that these NA error values don't show up in the chart. So I'm going to select both of my data series here for each day of the week, and I'm going to insert just my regular column chart here. And you'll notice by default what happens is the columns are beside each other. Well, that's what Excel is going to do by default. What I want to do again is to get them to overlap. So the way we do that is we set that overlap to 100%. Again, I'm going to select one of the columns for either data point, it doesn't matter. I'm going to press Control-1 on my keyboard. And in my series overlap here, I'm going to set the series overlap to 100%. And like before, I'm going to set the gap width to 50%. Okay. And now what happens is the max data series only has that one value. Even though it's on top of the regular temperature data series, you don't see it covering up any of the other columns. It only covers up the one column for which the maximum value is. And as the data changes, it will automatically change. This is, again, a great way to have graphs that update themselves automatically and reduces the manual effort you have to put in every month to update those charts for your executives. Let me show this to you. Now, first of all, of course, we can get rid of our legend because we don't need that anymore. And let's say, for example, let's say Tuesday, if we change the data that came in, Tuesday, let's say, was 27 degrees. As soon as I enter it, you'll notice the chart updated with which was the maximum. This is a great way to have your chart automatically update for you. And when I press Control Z undo, it goes back. So start thinking about the possibilities with this. Think about, well, you could have some labeling, for example, where you have a data label that is customized. And for some cases, you don't need certain data labels to show up. So you can just put an NA as the value for that data point, and it's not going to show up. So you can now start to leverage these ideas and build them together in order to create those advanced charts that you really want to create. You don't need to use some fancy dataviz package. Excel has a lot of capabilities if you simply leverage some of these chart hacks to create those advanced charts that you want to create. Let's go and take a look at the next chart hack that I want to share with you. The next hack I want to share is how you can add a custom line. Now, why wouldn't you just draw a line using the Insert a Line tool within Excel? Well, this technique, this hack is going to allow you to create that line based on data. This allows you to have calculated lines. It allows you to position them exactly where you want to based on the data. And this gives you the advantage of when it needs to be updated, you don't have to remember, oh, manually, I've got to go and move that line to that. No, you don't need to do that. And it has all the characteristics of lines. So you can make it thickness, you can decide whether it's dashed or not, you can add an arrow on the end. All of these features come with this hack. And how are we going to do this? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to use a scatter plot. A scatter plot has an option where it's a scatter plot with lines that doesn't have markers. So essentially it creates lines wherever you tell Excel the data in that chart series, wherever you tell Excel that line should be. This is what gives you that flexibility. It gives you the ability to create customized line callouts on your charts that are driven by the data. Again, being driven by the data makes it easy to update in the future because, well, you don't have to do anything to update it. The data will force the chart to draw the line in the correct spot. So let's go over to Excel. I'm going to show you how we create this customized line using this type of a scatter plot. Okay, we're back in Excel, and the example I want to show you is something that's very, very common, and it is to add a line to indicate the compound annual growth rate, or CAGR is the short form for that, to a column chart of values. So our data came in here, and we have year 1 through 4. We have the units sold here in our data table that came in from somewhere else. And the first thing we need to do, and especially this is important when you're calculating the line based on the data, is to have helper cells. So helper cells is usually a section I set up here to the right of the data that came in from my analysis. And my helper cells here are going to be sort of those in-between calculations so that I don't have to make the formulas in the chart data table so incredibly complex. And the first thing I'm going to do here is to create the compound annual growth rate and get it as a number. And the formula I'm using here, let me go up to the formula bar here, is the RRI formula. It's the internal rate of return, one of the variations on it in Excel. And what it does is it tells me it's 0.05563, so 5.6% when you round it. Now, what I always like to do when I'm doing these return calculations is to test it. So I'll take my first value here, 2563, and then I will use this compound annual growth rate to calculate what the values would be if the growth was the exact same every single year. Because that's what CAGR is. CAGR says, hey, you know what? Take the growth between the first point and the last point values, and what if it was the same every year? Now, it's not going to be the same every year, of course, but what if it was? What would that rate be? So what I do is I use that rate that's been calculated and then test it. This makes sure that the formula that I'm relying on isn't incorrect in some way. I didn't put a parameter in incorrectly, or I didn't select the right function, something like that. So that's the first set of helper cells, is to actually create what that CAGR number is. Now the next set of helper cells here is about our line. So our line, what I want it to be is I want it to be positioned above the columns, a consistent amount above the value of the columns. That allows me to have space above the columns for the data labels, and it allows that line to look like it's supposed to look. And so what I'm doing here is I'm making a decision here. This is an input that you can do. Is I said, okay, the line distance in percentage. So I want it to be 15% above the line, above that line that's going to be the largest. So my distance that I'm going to add is I said, find the maximum of B7 to B10. So find the maximum of the units values, multiply that by my percentage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to position this line, that distance, 452.25, above every value, because that allows me to now make sure that I have that line consistent. Now, when I say every value, it's really the first and last value, because that's really where the line's being drawn. The intermediate values aren't what's important. It's that first and last. I want it positioned properly there. So I've done my helper calculations, those intermediate calculations. Now I can set up my chart data. So my chart data is down here, and again, I have the units. That's pretty standard. I have my force 0 here because, again, especially when you're talking about CAGR, when you're talking about any sort of growth rate, you have to have the slope of that line accurate. So remember that chart hack I talked about earlier about forcing it to 0? That's what I'm using here. So you start to see how these different hacks build on each other and allow you to really make that complex chart much easier to create. Now, that's the data for the column chart, but what about the line? So for the line, it's down here. It's the CAGR line. So I've given it a name. The data series is going to be CAGR line. I have an X and a Y. Now, X and a Y, because a scatter plot has to have both X values and Y values. Now, you think of a traditional scatter plot, you have all the different values along the X and the Y, but with a column chart, what are the X values? I mean, the Y values, are going to be the vertical axis there, but what are the X values? And here's where it's good to know that in a column chart, each column, the center of each column is on an individual number, and it's just incremented by 1. So the first column on the left is number 1, second column is number 2, number 3, and so on. So when I'm setting my values here for my X, my first point is going to be at 1, because that's going to be above the center of the first column, the leftmost column. And the last one's going to be 4. So because I have 4 columns here, it's going to be the last column. Now, obviously, I could make these formulas if I wanted to. If I needed to, I could do that, because maybe I have a different number of data points sometimes, and you can make this more complex, but I'm just trying to keep it simple for this example. Now, the Y values. The Y values, when we take a look at our formula here, we go up to our formula bar, B17 plus I7. So it is whatever the value is for that first point, and adding on, again, I7 is this line distance that we calculated that I wanted to be consistent above. So it puts it far enough above, again, so it gives me that room for the data labels above each of the columns. Now, how we build this is going to be in stages. So stage 1 is to build our column chart, and then we're going to stage 2, we're going to add on the scatter plot. And you'll see why, because the scatter plot requires different inputs, we have to build it in stages. Now, I've also done, and it's one of the things I wanted to show you here, is sort of a bonus tip, bonus hack, is to use a cell as the chart title. So this cell here, A27, I have set up using a formula to create the title that includes the calculation. So let me zoom in on the formula here for you, and we'll take a look. So I have put in the text, the standard text I want, CAGR over time period, colon, space. We always need the space. And then I've used the concatenation operator, which is that ampersand. And I've used the text function. The text function is a function in Excel that converts a number into formatted text. And you use pretty much the same sort of formatting you would use when you use number formatting. So I've said, take G6, which is that calculated CAGR value, and express it as a percentage with 1 decimal place. That is what gives me the text down here, CAGR over time period, colon space, 5.6%. Now I'm going to be able to use that as the chart title. So you start to see how these calculations give you flexibility and can change whenever you need to. So let's start. I'm going to create my column chart first, and this is the standard. I've selected both of those data series, insert my regular column chart we have here, and I'm going to do the formatting that I did before. So I'm going to make them overlap. The force 0 needs to overlap. So I'm going to select one of the columns, Control 1 opens my formatting task pane. And then in my series overlap again, I'm going to set the series overlap to 100%. And I'm going to set my gap width here to 50%. Just makes the chart look better. I can get rid of the legend, I can get rid of the grid lines, and then I'll go ahead and add some data labels outside in. So I have my data labels above the columns, so that looks all good. The chart title, so let's do that hack first. So the chart title, I can click into the chart title, but instead of entering text here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the formula bar. I'm going to click in the formula bar, and then I'm going to say equals, and then I'm going to select my cell that has that title in it. And you'll notice, let me zoom in so you can see what it did here. What it did is it gives me a full cell reference. So it has the worksheet name and the cell with the dollar signs, locks it in. It has to do that because it needs to be for sure on that particular cell. Now when I hit enter, you'll notice it creates the chart title from that cell. So if I change that cell in any way, either through a formula, the data changes, I want to change the text, the title in this chart automatically updates. So that's how we get the chart title from a cell. Now, how do we add this next data series on so that we can create the line? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the chart, and then in my chart design ribbon, I'm going to go up to this button here called Select Data. I'm going to click on that, and it gives me the Select Data Source dialog box. And you'll notice it lists my series here on the left. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a data series. Okay, so I'm going to add a data series, and I'll click on the Add button. And what it does is it gives me the dialog box here. And the dialog box only has 2 requests. First of all, what's the series name? Where is the series name in the worksheet? And secondly, where are the values? But you say, but Dave, we need an X and a Y. Right. So Excel assumes that the new data series you're adding is the same chart type as the previous, the last data series in this chart. Well, that's a column, so it thinks it only needs a series name and values. We have to add it this way first, and then we will come back and change it. So this is why I said in stages. So where is the series name? Well, I can simply move on my worksheet, go over and select the series name is called CAGR line. So I click on that, and you'll notice it changes the value there. Okay. Now the series values, what you want to do there is you want to backspace, get rid of everything there, and then go and select the Y value cells. Now, why the Y value cells? Because it's going to result in it being correct when we change it later on. Just makes it a whole lot easier. Now I can click OK. And click OK again. What did it do? Well, it placed those columns on top. Well, yeah, that's normally what it would do, but what I want to make sure is I want to make sure that it turns it into the scatter plot. So how do I change just this data series to be a different type of graph? Well, it's really quite easy. You simply just right-click on any of the columns, and we use this option here. I want to zoom in on so you make sure you see it. it says change series chart type. This allows us to change the chart type of each individual series, not the whole chart, just each series. So when I click on that, what it does is it opens up the custom combination chart type. So it says, hey, okay, this is going to be custom one. So what would you like to do? And what it does down here on the bottom is it says each of the series, you can choose what type of chart it is. So for my CAGR line, I'm going to drop this down, and in the list it gives me, now it will not give you every single type of chart, and in fact, some of them don't even work together, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down until I find the one that's the category XY scatter, and I'm going to select the one here that says scatter with straight lines. I don't want markers, I just want the lines. Because again, since I've defined only 2 points, it's only going to draw one line. Makes it simple that way. So I'm going to select that, and you'll notice it automatically changes it in the preview. Now I can select OK. But it's only going between the first 2 columns, Dave. How do we change that? Well, here's where, again, now that Excel knows it needs an X and a Y, we can go and tell it where the X values are. So again, I'll go back to my select data. I'll select my CAGR line, and I'll click on Edit. And what I want you to see here is it's now asking us, okay, I know where the series name and the Y values are. Okay, where's the X values? Because it never asked us before because it didn't think it needed it. Now it knows it needs it. So I'll click in here, and I'll just highlight my 2 X values, click OK, and you'll notice that in the graph, it automatically updated it. Now I have the CAGR line where I want it to be. And the last thing I want to do to this is just add the arrowhead. Because this is a line, just like any other line, when I select it, I can go to the chart format ribbon, and in the shape outline, it allows me to select weight, dashes, and arrows. Now I don't want to change the weight. I think it's okay. I don't want it to be dashed, although you could change that if you want, but it does allow you to select the arrow. So if I want to give it direction, because again, it is from year 1 to year 4, so I want to indicate that direction with an arrow, I can select this arrow here, this style, and it adds that arrowhead. So now what I have on my chart is I have the title saying here's the CAGR value, here is the direction from year 1 to year 4. So I've added that line onto the columns. I've added it for CAGR. You can start to think about how might you use this in your own charts, the labeling that you need to add on for the charts that you're creating. Is it an arrow? Is it a line? It's one of the things I've also used this for is to add a goal or a standard line on a bar chart. So if you have bars and you want to say, here's the goal, and some have exceeded and some haven't met the goal, this is a great way that you can add that line onto a bar chart. With this scatter, because again, it's part of the chart, it updates automatically with the data. So for example, in year 4 here, if instead of 3015, let's say it was 3500. What it does is it calculates a new CAGR. So you'll notice the CAGR automatically updated because it calculated it. The title in this cell automatically updated. And the line, the slope of the line, automatically changes and repositions. This is what gives you that flexibility. I'll just hit Control-Z and you'll see it go back to what it was. This is what gives you the flexibility inside Excel to be able to add that line, whatever you want that line to do, whether you want to direct the audience's attention, whether you want to add additional information with that line, but it allows you to control it as the creator of the chart within Excel, all so that it updates automatically using a scatter with lines data series. Now, let's take a look at the next chart hack. The next chart hack I want to show you is how you can add a custom text box anywhere you want on your chart. And this really leverages what we just talked about in terms of adding a line with a scatter plot with lines. What we're going to do is we're going to add this text box as a single point scatter plot, because it's not going to have any lines, it's not going to have any markers, but it allows us to add a data label using the series name, which gives us the ability to place a custom text box anywhere on our chart. So let's jump over to Excel and I'll show you how to do this. We're back in Excel and I'm going to build on this CAGR example that we were using. And what I want to do now is, instead of using the chart title to have the CAGR amount, I want it actually right in the middle of the line here. I want this text box in the middle of the line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a data series just for this one text label. And the way I'm going to have the text is I'm going to create that as the series name. So you'll notice here my series name is CAGR colon 5.6%. And when we take a look at the formula here, we have F6, so that's the name CAGR. So again, I can change the acronym I'm using, my concatenation, the colon and the space, and then the concatenation with the text function that takes the CAGR value and turns it into a percentage. So again, we're creating a custom data series name that updates when the data updates. Now for my chart, I can add this next data series, which is only going to have one point. So I'll go back to my chart design ribbon and click on my select data button, and I'm going to add a new data series, and you'll notice that it asks me for the name, the X and the Y values, because it thinks it's a scatter. So the series name, I'll click on that particular cell there, which has my name. The X values, there's only one cell, so I don't have to select anything. And the Y values, backspace, select my one Y value, click OK, and nothing seems to have changed. Well, that's because it doesn't show up. Now, how did I know the X and Y values? So the X and Y values are simply the average. Again, let me zoom in on the formula here. It's the average of the start and end values of the line. So the average X and the average Y of the line, which allows me to position right in the middle of the line. Now I want to add a data label, but how do I select the series when I can't see it? Well, that's where we again go to the chart format ribbon, use the drop-down list on the left to select the series CAGR 5.6%. Now I've selected the data series. You notice this little selection here in the middle, and I can say I want to add a data label, and I'm going to go to the more options. So whenever you're selecting a data label, instead of the default, you can say more options, and that automatically brings up the dialog box here. So I can select what I want. Now, because we want this to be a text label and we've set up that custom text, I say, I want the label to contain series name, and I don't want it to have the Y value, and I want it to be positioned center. So that puts it in the center right where that data point was, exactly where we want it to be. Now, because it's on a line, you can't see it very well. So how do we make it show up better? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a fill color and an outline, so it makes it easy to see. I'm going to go to the paint can here, the fill and line, and I'm going to say the fill color, I want that to be a solid fill, and I want it to be not, that color is too dark, I'm going to say white, same background, and I want the border to be a solid line, and I'm going to use the gray, which is the same as the line. And I don't need it to be very thick, so maybe half a point. Let's see how that looks. Oh, that looks nice. So now I've added this custom text box driven by data using the series name as the text, and I've positioned it exactly where I want. So just think about it, the opportunity this gives you to place calculated text annotations on your charts based on data. This gives you a tremendous flexibility, and it gives you, again, another skill to use to create those customized charts that you're wanting to create. So let's bring all of these hacks together into an advanced example so I can show you how you can build these hacks together to create a really customized data visual in Excel. So here we are back in Excel. And this is an example that leverages a number of the hacks that I've shown you in this session. We have some time periods, current time period, then -1 through -4. We have various values. And what I'm doing here is I'm adding a call out that shows the difference between whichever value we want as the start and the end. And it shows the value, the difference between the starting and the ending, and the direction. So you'll notice I've got lines, some that are dashed, these two are dashed. This is a arrow, the color, I've got the text label, all of this, building in what we just talked about. And you'll see all the data series. I have the columns, I have the horizontal line 1 and 2, those are the dashed, vertical line if it's up, vertical line if it's down. Notice here's the NA error values that mean this data series doesn't show on the particular chart. And this will automatically update. So for example, if I change the last value from 63 to, let's say, 22, notice how it automatically updates the direction of the arrows. Now the vertical line up has the NAs. So this is all automatically updating. I can undo that. If I wanted to change the start position, so this goes beyond some of what I've talked about in this particular session, but I can change the start position by just changing a value here, and it now recalculates and figures it out using the helper cells. So you can see how combining these ideas I've shown you in this session, the helper cells, the different chart hacks, allows you to create some of these really advanced data visuals, all within Excel. You don't need extra dataviz software, apps, packages, add-ins, anything like that. You can do this within Excel. Thanks for attending this session. Please take a couple of minutes and complete the evaluation for this session and all the other sessions you attend at this conference. It really helps us as presenters and the organizers to be able to create conferences that meet your needs. So please use the link you see on the screen, or just use the QR code with your smartphone and go to the evaluation. This session again is Favorite Excel Chart Hacks by Dave PARADI. Microsoft would also like your help in some research they're doing. Please use the QR code on the screen to answer some questions that the Excel team has. This helps Microsoft and the Excel team to make the product better for all of us. A final thank you for attending this session. I've put together a page of additional tutorials on my website that you can access using the QR code you see on your screen now. If you want more information on the type of training and other resources I provide to corporate professionals to improve their presentations of data, please go to my website at thinkoutsidetheslide.com or financialviz.com. Thanks again for attending. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
All right, thank you very much for that, Dave. I believe there was a question that came in, so happy to hand that over to you if you're ready.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much. So the question that came in is a really great question. People, and it's good to see this because people are trying to extend the idea that I shared. So the question was, can the trick you use to highlight the maximum temperature be used to control which values get labels in a line chart? And that's a wonderful idea for extending that particular hack that I showed you. And yes, that's exactly what you can do. So let me actually show you. I'm going to share my screen in Excel here, and let me show you how this works. So I have, here's that example that you were asking about, is the temperature, and we got the values of NA and we got the 25. So the question becomes, can we use this for data labels? That's exactly what we can do. So let me show you how we do this. So let's say I wanted to add data labels, but I only wanted the data label to show up when that was the maximum. Now I've done that through the color here, the orange color, but if I add a data label, it's exactly going to be the same. It's only going to show for those values that are not the NA error value. So I'm going to go and I'm going to say add a data label. And again, I'm going to use the more options. This is something that I showed in the session. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to combine a couple of items in the data label. So one of the things to notice here is that the series name I've put here is max colon. So I've added a colon after it. That's because I want to use that as a separator. So let's go back to my data labels here. And I'm going to just zoom in for a second here so you can see this. So it says, what do you want the label to contain? Well, I want it to contain the series name, which is the max colon, and the value, and I want to separate them not by a comma, but by a space. And so now what you'll notice is my label is max colon space 25. But you don't see that label for any of the other columns. It doesn't, you don't have that for any of the other columns. Now, when you change, so let's say, again, Tuesday instead of 19 was, let's say 27. Okay, so 27, hit enter. You'll notice not only the color has moved, but also the label moved. So the person who asked about, can we use this to control data labels? Absolutely. It's the exact same idea. You get to choose. And what I showed you here, additional sort of idea, is to set your data series to be exactly what you want it to be. Now, you might say, well, Dave, okay, you used a space as the separator between the text and the number. Well, why can't you just pick colon? Like, you know, why do you have to type it in? Well, because Excel doesn't allow you to use colon. It's not something that's even an option in the drop-down list. Now, if you're using the online version of Excel, what you'll notice is you have more options for the character that separates two portions or segments between the data series name and the actual value. So it's one of those things where it's a difference between the versions of Excel. Unfortunately, that's a difference, and we can't kind of do anything about it, but it is something that we have to understand those limitations. So if you're mostly going to be dealing with the desktop version, which is what mine is, then you have to type it in.
Thank you very much for your time. If you've got nothing else to add, I'll let you go. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Remember, Oscar's going to put up the evaluation slide again. So make sure you fill out the evaluation, not just for this session, but for all the sessions you attend. Have a great rest of the conference, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.